All right, welcome back, grade 8 students. Today we're going to be learning about the 13 colonies of America. This is part of your world history subject. So we're going to be talking about the life in early America. Okay, but before we start, here's some vocabulary of some new words that you might not have known. First up is colony. So a colony is basically a settlement in a new area. This means that if you go to a new area, you're going to claim that new area is yours. All right? So the first colonies in North America were along the eastern coast. This means that most of the colonies, the new colonies, were along the eastern coast. Okay? Second one is settler. So what is a settler? A settler is a person that moves to an area usually to colonize. So these are the people that are sent to different places in order to claim that that area is part of or is their colony, right? So a settler usually starts a colony, okay? So settlers came from Spain, France, Sweden, Holland, and England, right? So here's the 13 original colonies, okay? So the 13 colonies are New Hampshire, Massachusetts, sorry for the pronunciation, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Okay? It was these colonies, okay, that came together to form the United States later on. So, what were the reasons why people were settling down in America instead of just staying in their countries? So, here are some of the reasons. Some people didn't like or agree with the Church of England. They wanted the church to be more pure. These people were called Puritans. They decided to start a colony in the northeast part of America. So, it was mainly because of religion, right? So the Church of England was very powerful back in the days, and some people just didn't like how the Church of England was handling or, ruling over most of Europe. The affected countries, though, people who migrated were mainly from Europe, and the people from Europe were mostly under the Church of England. So here are other reasons why they might want to settle in America instead of just staying in their own country. One is wealth and resources, right? Since America is untouched, right? There are a lot of resources that they can find there and make them more rich. Uh, Another is new beginning and getting out of debt, right? Once you settle down to a new place, you get a clean slate, meaning that all your past mistakes, all the things that you have done, everything gets left behind when you leave your country and you settle down on a new place, right? Escape political persecution just means that, you don't want the ruler of your country. That's why you decided to settle down in a different place. Okay, so here are the colonies. Here's a bigger map or a clearer map for that. Okay, each colony was unique in its characteristics. However, they are grouped together based on location, reasons they were founded, and what type of industry they had. So these original territories, these three colonies, yeah. So the colonies that you see here that are colored, okay, will form the US eventually, right? As you can see on the left side, there's still some French territory. On the southern side, there's still some Spanish territory. So here are the three major colonies. We have the New England colony, the Middle colony, and the Southern colony. So New England colonies is comprised of Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Middle colony was comprised of Delaware, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey. The southern colonies were comprised of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Right? Now let's move into the New England colonies. But before that, we have some vocabularies for you. So we have frontier and charter. So what is frontier? It is land beyond the areas already settled. Okay? Colonies would expand their settlements beyond what was already colonized by heading in a westerly direction. Sometimes this expansion would cause conflict with Native Americans. Okay? So if we go back to the map a while ago, you saw that map, right? So if they expanded, let me go back to that real quick. Okay? So over here, if they decided to colonize, right? You see this colored, right? The colored uh, colonies. If they decided to go westwards and try to colonize more places, they would eventually run into the natives and to the other people who are already settling there. And that would cause conflicts, right? So frontier is basically places, right, that has already been that there are already settlers living there. Okay. So the next word is charter. What is charter? It's an official paper. Settlers had permission from the King of England to start a colony in America. So basically, a charter is just an official document with the king's stamp and everything, right? It is um, like a passport for today, right? A passport is your official document if you want to travel from a country, from one country to another via airplane, right? So likewise, the official paper was an official document from someone with authority, right? That gives you permission to do something. So the New England colonies, so the settlers here wanted to keep their families together and practice their own religions. They were used to doing many things themselves and not depending on other people for much. Some people were looking for economic opportunities, some starting fishing settlements. Okay? So here we have facts about the New England colonies. So people in New England towns lived, worked, and worshiped together. Okay, so they are a close-knit community, meaning they are really close to each other. People use a barter system instead of money. This means to trade goods. Okay, so the barter system is basically I have a good, you have a good, we swap it. Okay, we don't use money. I don't pay you money. We just swap goods. Meaning, for example, if I have a chicken, you wanted my chicken, right? I would just ask you for maybe 5 pieces of apple. Yeah. So that's a barter system. Okay. The meeting house was the most important building in the town. Okay. It's pretty self-explanatory. Women and girls spent hours cooking and preparing food. They churned butter and dried fruits. The food was stored to last throughout the winter. They used animal fat to make candles and soap. The men would hunt and work in the fields. They also made their own tools, meaning that women and young girls would mainly stay in the houses to do house things, and the men would be the one doing all the work. Right. For the economy, they are mainly farming and fishing communities. They make their own clothes and shoes. They grew corn and wheat in large numbers, and a part of it, or a large part of it, was shipped to England. Boston was the new major of England, of New England port. Okay, so by 1750, Busy cities cropped up around the New England colonies. Some colonists lived in the small towns surrounded by farmland outside of the big cities, right? So, how is their school? So, their school is really, really basic. One room, one teacher. Very strict children were often whipped or punished, whipped for punishment, and the main subject was reading. So it was pretty strict back then. All right, before we move into the middle colonies, I have some notes here that I want to read to you guys. So the first English immigrants to what would become the New England colony were a small group of Puritan separatists. So again, what is a Puritan? Puritan is the person or persons who wanted to make the religion pure. Okay? So they are Puritan separatists, which means they separated from the church. So these separatists would later be called the Pilgrims. Okay? So they arrived in Plymouth in 1620 to found the Plymouth colony. 10 years later, a wealthy syndicate known as the Massachusetts Bay Company sent a much larger group of Puritans to establish another Massachusetts settlement. With the help of local natives, the colonists soon got the hang of farming, fishing, and hunting, right? And that's why Massachusetts prospered. Now, these notes that I'm reading to you will be available in your curriculum in the website. So if you want the notes that I have that I'm reading, you can just go grab it from there. All right. So moving on, the middle colonies. All right. So in the middle colonies, before we start, we also have some vocabulary. So the first word is refuge. So refuge is just a safe place. It's when you're running away from something. It will be like a place where no one else can touch you. Okay? So many colonies long to find a refuge to live and worship that was away from the king's rule. So as you can see, the example we have here, many of the colonists were running away from the king's rule and they found refuge in America. So America was like a safe place for them. Okay? We also have immigrant and diversity. Immigrant, we are immigrants of this country, meaning that we were from a different place and we just started or we just came here to have a new life, right? So that started with our parents, then they brought us here. So that's what an immigrant is. So diversity is just a group of people from very different backgrounds, meaning people from different countries, people that have different races, and so on and so forth, right? So an interesting fact is in the middle colonies, it was a bunch of diverse people. I will explain to you that later on, why it was such a diverse place, right? The diversity of the people in the middle colonies were a lot. Okay, so the middle colonies, okay, were settlers that were looking to practice their own religion or to make money. Many of these people didn't bring their families with them from England and were the perfect workers for the hard work required in ironworks and shipyard. So what is the economy of the middle colonies? So these colonies were part agriculture and part industrial. This means they have farms and they have the industrial part, which is, of course, the iron making and the ship making, right? They grew wheat and other grains, right? Their factories produced iron, paper, and textiles, right? Trading goods with England was common. So the New English or the New England colony sent their goods to England, okay? But the middle colonies traded with England. That's a big difference. So here's some facts about the middle colonies, sometimes called the breadbasket colonies. The breadbasket colonies because they grew so many crops for making bread. In addition to the lush land for growing crops, there were several large harbors. This is where Germans built the Konosteja wagon. Okay, so as you can see, there's a picture right there of a wagon, right? That is the Konosteja wagon. And here we have more facts. So the first fact we have, settlers that live here came from many different places and backgrounds, all right? That's why I said that the middle colonies were very diverse, is very diverse, okay? So these were Dutch, Swedish, French, Belgian, English, and more, all right? They were living mainly in Philadelphia. So a lot of European countries came to, European people came to America and they settled in Philadelphia. Okay, so Philadelphia means brotherly love in Greek. It was founded on the principles of living peacefully together. Okay, so the people who live in the middle colonies were called Quakers. Okay, so they believe all people were equal. They refused to swear loyalty to the king or to the queen. They refused to participate in war, came to the Americans for refuge and worship. They lived in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. Right, before we move on to the southern colonies, again, I have some notes here that I want to read out about the middle colonies. So in 1664, King Charles II gave the territory between New England and Virginia, all right, which much of it was already occupied by Dutch traders, right? And landowners called patroons. All right. So King Charles gave it to his brother James. He was the Duke of York. Okay. So the English soon absorbed the Dutch New Netherland and renamed it New York. Okay. So that's where New York came from. It was originally named Dutch New Netherland. So in 1680, the king granted 45,000 square miles of land west of the Delaware River to William Penn. So William Penn was a Quaker who owned large swaths of land in Ireland. Okay, so he was now a Quaker, meaning that he came from Ireland and now he's living in the middle colony. So Penn, okay, Penn's North American holding became the colony of Pennswood or Pennsylvania, right? Now, the reason why people were emigrating to that place from all over Europe was because mainly of their fertile soil and their religious toleration that Penn promised, meaning that there was no religion imposed on the people there, right? You were free to choose your own religion. All right, let's move on to the southern colonies. So what, before we start, as always, we have some vocabulary for you. So we have overseer and indigo. So overseer is just a person who was hired to watch slaves as they worked. So basically, like supervisors, they were just there to supervise on the slaves. Okay, so plantation owners hired overseers to watch the slaves and make sure they did their jobs right. Okay, indigo was just a plant, or is just a plant, which was used in making blue dye. The farmers grew indigo plants, and indigo was an important cash crop for the southern colonies. Right, southern colonies then. The settlers here, for the most part, wanted to make money. They brought their families and they kept them together on the plantation. Sorry for that. But their main reason for being here was to make the good money, right? So they have different reasons into why they were coming here, right? If you move back, right, you will find out that they actually have different reasons. How was their economy? Entirely agricultural. So mainly they were farming, right? And a large part of the workforce they had were African slaves. So they were still part of the slave, the people who were still using slaves. right? So their plantations grew tobacco, rice, and indigo. So you guys know about the indigo, as I have discussed. Indigo was made into blue dyes. Rice, you already know that. You eat that every day. And tobacco is used for smoke, cigarettes. So here are some facts about the southern colonies. Slavery was legal. All right. Children born to slaves become slaves themselves. Sometimes families were broken apart and sold to other plantation owners. Enslaved people were often abused or beaten. So they had slavery. I mean, during this time, slavery was still a common thing, right? So it was not unordinary for them to have slaves back then. So how about their school? Boys normally went to grammar schools while girls went to dame schools. There were no chalkboards, maps, or papers. School teachers were strict and were allowed to hit their students or to make them wear a dunce hat if they were bad or said the wrong answer. So it's very strict back then. So other facts they had about school, in the New England colonies, children were taught to read so that they could study the Bible, right? Because as I said, the New England colony was still under or is still under England, okay? Boys got to learn Latin and math and other subjects to get into college. Girls could learn to read, but they weren't allowed to go to grammar school or to go to college. In the middle colonies, okay, so this is that colony. Most schools were private. Students also learned other subjects, so they couldn't get into college. So they could get into college. Girls weren't allowed to attend unless they were Quakers. Sorry. In the southern colonies, children were mostly taught at home, as in the other colonies. Southern girls did not go to higher schooling. So, what did they do in their free time? They made new clothes, sleigh rides, and ice skate, barn raising, dance and social clubs, and plays. Conflict in the colonies. As colonists settled and spread across New England, they entered land that was already lived on by the Native Americans. So, as I have discussed before, the frontier, as they expanded their land, as they expanded westward, they would see people who were already living there, and that would cause conflict. So the Native Americans and colonists began attacking each other's villages, okay? Because one people wants to rule over the other, and one just wants to live peacefully, all right? The Native Americans just wanted their land peacefully, while uh, the colonists wanted new land. They had very different ideas about owning land. Natives believed no one could own land, while colonists believed you could own it if you claim it. As I said, colonists are those people who claim land. Arguments began to lead to war, resulting in lives lost. Some tribes were nearly completely wiped out. And that is the end for our lesson for today, which is about the 13 tribes or the 13 colonies of USA.